Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence with psychiatrist Bernard David Beitman, MD. Dr. Beitman is the founder of the Coincidence Project. The project encourages people like you to tell each other coincidence stories. To learn more about Dr. Beitman's work, put Connecting with Coincidence in your web browser. You'll find his book, his Psychology Today blog, and the interviews from this podcast. And now your host, Bernard Beitman, MD.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD. This is CC with BB. The word coincidence here is a short way of saying meaningful coincidence. A meaningful coincidence is intended to include both synchronicity and serendipity. The definition stimulates a little conflict because the academics who study serendipity tend to resist including synchronicity in their thinking, while students of synchronicity tend to think that serendipity is the lesser concept. Synchronicity often involves psychological and spiritual, while serendipity concentrates mostly on the practical. But there is an overlap, a significant one, and by looking at the overlap, we get to understand each one separately. Our guest today, I met at a serendipity conference. As you will see, she represents, I think, a hybrid of both kinds of meaningful coincidences. Sabrina Sauer is an assistant professor of media studies at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, at the Research Center for Media and Journalism Studies. She obtained an MA in Media Studies, a PhD in Science and Technology Studies, and a professionally trained actor prior to writing her dissertation about user technology improvisation as a source for information and communication technology innovation. And she earned that at the University of Twente, also in the Netherlands. I mean, she's an actor who also got a degree in technology. That's the kind of thing we're looking for, people who are able to go from different places and find the overlap. She has published about media studies, about media productions, the agency of users, the agencies of users, and technological artifacts, exploratory research, improvisation, and serendipity. Her current research focuses on the use of digital data and creative media production practices, social innovation. There's a lot to be said about serendipity and social innovation. And then there's also serendipity and digital humanities. So Sabrina, welcome to the Connecting with Coincidence show.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Why don't you tell us about being in an audience one time and there was this guy talking and then something happened. Why don't you tell us about that one?
Yeah, so I met my husband at a conference, actually the first media studies conference I ever attended, having just defended my dissertation in science and technology studies. And I had no idea where to go at that conference. And I thought, you know what, I'll check out the work of one of my colleagues who is studying performance and theater. There was this guy chairing the session. And just as I was wondering about specifically how all the presenters were discussing actors, and not so much this colleague of mine, perhaps, but they were talking about actors as kind of props on the screen, like part of the scenery. And I thought, yeah, but these are people, like it's an embodied performance. And so this chairperson asks exactly that question, saying, well, what about the agency of the actor here in the decision-making process of being creative? It's not only about the director making certain decisions. And I thought, wow, that was my question, and it was not related really to the panel, to the subject directly. It was kind of a random topic, I would say. And I thought, wow, I really have to talk to that guy, because that is amazing that we had the same question. And so, I tapped him on the shoulder with the how things go. I saw him at the final party, and he said, "Oh, I really like the most cheesy thing you can say, basically. Like, I really liked your question." And yeah, we just kept talking, and yeah, now we both live. He moved from Canada to the Netherlands to be with me. So yeah, it was a nice conversation.
I guess it was a nice conversation.
Yeah.
So you were you went up to him, but one of the things that we were talking about earlier is how you have an intuitive sense for the subtext of what somebody might be thinking and feeling.
Mhm.
And as you listen to that man answer or ask a question that was on your mind,
Yeah.
what went on inside of you about him, except that I want to go talk to him some more? What did you figure out about him?
Well, I thought this is somebody who has, I guess, a like mind, but I got really excited. It was like, well, I guess it was also connected to attraction, right? That I thought, oh, this is what a great idea, or what, oh, I want to talk to this person. So that I felt the, well, I guess the spark there, that I thought, oh, I need to talk to this person because we feel like we are in sync. And and
You
that
you felt like you were in sync,
yes.
and part of the you're an academic, kind of. I mean, you're an academic, but you're also broader than a lot of people. You had an acting experience, and you rely on intuition. So, as you understand the word serendipity,
Yeah.
and which you've written about, and you are among serendipitologists to some degree. How does serendipity, in your mind, relate to synchronicity?
Well, to me, serendipity. So the way in which how I approach the idea of serendipity um, is like I take a process perspective there. I don't think that there's this, the way in which many people define serendipity as a moment in time that afterwards you retroactively think about, oh, that was a coincidence, or that was a fruitful coincidence, as they say. And whereas I think that it is, serendipity is part of a process that I would like to think of in terms of improvisation. So somebody might, in which actually context is very important. So there are certain situations that one may help create or facilitate in which a person may experience serendipity more readily. So to me, that also means that serendipity is an embodied experience and is something that, um, in my studies of, say, search engines, where you say, oh, I'm going to take a gamble and click on the first thing that I see and see if that gives me a serendipitous result. Think, well, yeah, you can design that interface in a particular way, or a system in a particular way, to trigger a person's curiosity, but then you still have to bear in mind where that person is situated, right? Or what drives somebody. So, which is why I'm not so much interested in, for instance, developing a serendipitous search engine, but it's far more about creating a setting in which somebody might uh, experience a coincidence. So I think, and it's, so for me, it's more about how does a person, when they encounter a new technology, or, well, in the case of ICTs, how do they start playing around with that technology, to figure out what they can do with it? So how do people play with affordances, basically? And how do they improvise with that? And then maybe they will experience serendipity, thinking, oh, wait, yeah, I was looking for a bicycle shop, very Dutch. And no, there it is. But that, and that to me, also in looking at information retrieval and say recommender systems, this.
There's a lot of words you're using here that
Okay.
many of our audiences don't know.
Yeah.
And one of them is affordances.
Okay.
And another is embodiment. And the recommender system we can kind of talk about too, but
Yeah.
define embodiment and affordances, please.
So affordance is, I think, a term. I don't have my all my references are right in front of me here, but from the 70s, I thought it was Gibson who
It doesn't matter.
define it.
This is
But
not
it, but it's
this is
very
not
much about,
this is not an academic
yeah.
thing.
Yeah,
Just tell us
okay,
what
yeah.
affordance is. Just
So an
tell us what.
affordance is what does, say, if you have a book, you can turn its pages, the artifact, so the book allows you to do certain things with it, and there are certain preferred uses when you're reading a book, turning the pages, reading all the letters, reading the words. But of course, you can also use a book to hit someone on the head. That the book allows you to do that, or you can burn a book. So that's part of its affordances. It's just not a preferred use. And I think many technologies are designed in particular ways to be intuitive, that allow you to, that kind of stimulate a particular way of engaging with that technology, and hence with its affordances, when you can also use technologies, whether it's a hammer, a book, a cell phone, in alternative ways. And I would call that improvisation.
Oh, so improv is affordances. You are counterposing to improvisation.
I think affordances are part of improvisation.
So
Yeah.
it's like you take the main use of the book. That book analogy is a really good one, and then you say, well, you can also hit somebody over the head with it, or you can warm your hands with it if you can get a fire going. And that's a really nice analogy, because I didn't understand affordances as the primary potential use, or setup use of the thing. The affordances sounded to me like, what can you afford? Like, what can
Ah,
what can you get out of this? What does this afford you to be able to do? That's what affordances became to me. But you're hierarchizing them, that a lot of things have a primary use. I mean, use is a better word for me. I can use the book in this way.
use.
And the word affordance just cropped up when I was reading some other paper. What afford? It took me a while to figure that out even more, but now you're making it clear. Use is a better idea. What are the potential uses of this thing, and what's the primary use for which this thing was intended? And then
Yes.
your idea is to be able to say there are other potential uses, particularly with technology.
Yeah, and this idea of these alternative uses was actually triggered by research done by Madeleine Acriche, about who called different uses of technologies like using different scripts, that different technologies have affordances, uses, but that each technology has a different use script. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, if a technology has a script, it means you can improvise with it, because nobody follows a script. So I took it very literal, also from more perhaps the actor perspective.
Yes.
That I thought, yeah, but a script is not the way it's going to go down. It's you play with the script, and that's how you also get meaning from something. I think because you okay.
What do you mean by meaning here?
Well, meaning as in what a reading a book, get like the experience of reading a book, or um, yeah, how you, by playing with well, maybe the book analogy doesn't work like that,
Playing is okay.
but playing with the technology in a sense, and discovering what you can do with something, and then perhaps using something in an alternative way. So creating your own script, improvising, can then give you all sorts of new insights and make you curious about other things. So for me, that can lead to serendipitous insights. But for me, it's more about that experience. And when I talk about embodiment, it's, I think often there's a great, especially in particular kinds of media studies, and this focus on the text, the media text. And I think, but it's about, so the media text, like a film, a television show, podcast, or an object kind of thing that you can then read and analyze. And I think, but it's about the act of reading. So it's an embodied experience. that's what I mean with embodied. It's not some sort of abstract something going on, but that's also why I think contextualizing the experience of experiencing serendipity is important by drawing it back into the body, so to speak.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and the body brings it to experience, and
Yes.
brings it to forgive the word emotion. I mean, serendipity is like the only emotion you get with serendipity is surprise, and then gratitude that after maybe it works, so you get
Yeah.
something out of it. So it's like that kind of gratefulness to it. But what you're doing is a bit radical within the serendipity business, with them trying to be able to make it much more mind. It's much more mind. It's that the Cartesian split that is so popular in Western science, is the mind exists separately from the body,
Yeah.
and there's no connection. And there you are, knowing that the body is connected. I knew a guy in high school. His name was is Dennis Bricker. I still remember him in 8th grade. He had this drawing of a beaker, of chemistry beaker, with a little pole coming out of it. And in the beaker was nutrients. And out of the top of the pole was a brain. And the brain existed in this beaker, and that's all it needed. And that was like a definition of Western science,
Yeah.
and particularly the way you are talking about it. And so you're a bit of a radical, Sabrina.
Oh, that's always good.
It's it's my kind of radical. It's
No, but I think it's the same with um yeah, with acting, and also with this idea of a subtext. So an intention that may not be entirely explicit, that you perhaps you cannot even voice it, but it's in acting, like in the way in which you behave. And I don't want to call myself a hardcore behavioralist or anything, but
no,
I think
you're emphasizing the importance of behavior
yeah.
in creating serendipity, and it just doesn't happen in the moment. It happens in the moments up to the moment. There's a lot of things going on, and including the use of intuition or improvisation or playing around,
Yeah.
that helps some of this happen. One of the reasons I'm fascinated with the academic approach to serendipity is that for synchronicity, serendipitologists are helping us understand the ways in which to increase meaningful coincidences. And the title of my book on coincidence diary, my own personal coincidence diary, which I've taken like from when I was in like 8 or 9 years old, when I had my first big coincidence. My dog got lost. I went to look for him, and I got lost, and then we found each other. And I said, "Hey, oh," and I that was that a serendipity? Was that a synchronicity? People will argue about it. I don't know. It's both to me, because it was very emotional, but it was very practical as well. And so that's where one of those first ones. So I put the two of them together, and
Yeah.
and the title of my coincidence book, as I mentioned to you, is currently "The Dog That Trots About Finds a Bone." That you're not going to have serendipities or synchronicities just sitting in your bedroom most of
No.
the time. You got to like get out and do something, and that helps make things happen. And
Yeah.
you do that. You are an actor first. You are a movement person first. You dance?
Yeah, well, this in the last year, hardly, but
Yeah.
yeah, yes, yeah, movement. But even in say this the Serendipity Symposium where we met, it's also about, in this time of being online, about talking to many different people, like, and then making that connection. And it's even possible online. I hadn't really, I mean, I do study online media also, but it's not something I had really considered. The making connections, very meaningful
Well,
connections.
what happened with you and me? Because we made a connection,
Yeah.
and,
Yes.
and we might have talked for about a minute or two.
Yeah. Like 3 minutes, I think. Yeah,
at that, but somehow I want to talk to her some more. I mean, that's
yeah,
what
yeah.
I
Me
had.
too. I thought, yes, this is so interesting. So it was because I thought I had never thought about synchronicity before. Because it just never. Because I already feel that me talking about improvisation in
Is
a
where
field of serendipity is a lot of work. Because then it's like, well, that's kind of frivolous. And it's, what is improvisation? It's theater. You're not in theater studies. Where are you? You're too interdisciplinary. You have to choose. So it's, I find that a lot quite difficult to still to defend the idea that improvisation is very much worthwhile um, in media studies. And I think that synchronicity, I had just never encountered that before, strangely enough. But that's probably because if you're reading a lot of serendipity studies, it's just the way you describe it. It's not like they're friends. These
if they're not friends, I just asked some of my synchronicity friends, and he was pretty clear that serendipity is a lesser idea. It's measurable, it's academic, but synchronicity is like spiritual, and great feeling come out of it. And it's like there's some truth. There's a little bit of mystical experiences sometimes with synchronicity, where just these amazing things happen. But why do we have to like separate them out? We're talking about the same problem. Your improvisation being criticized by that, embodiment being criticized by that. Serendipity comes a lot from science and from discovery,
yeah,
particularly in medicine. I mean, it's been pharmacology. It's a lot of stuff coming. So it's all like researchy, but yeah, Horace Walpole came up with he was doing a painting thing. I mean, they were artists, but even then, the early serendipity guys were bibliophiles and like finding different books. So there was an information history
yeah,
in serendipity, while in synchronicity there's a more of a psychological and mystical background that came from Jung and the way Jung was talking about it. So these again are reflecting the
yeah.
dichotomy in the way people think about the world.
And I think that in a field like science and technology studies, where there's also quite there is also a focus on invention and the sociology of invention, right? That it's not so much about somebody having one bright idea one day, but that there's a whole process. There
Yeah,
are certain social actors, technological actors that all play a role in this process of discovery. And that I find that idea I find very appealing, of course. Yeah, my
it,
background is science and technology studies, so of course I find it appealing. But that I think, yeah, it's not about that one moment. It's that you pick that moment as part of the narrative, to the discourse around an invention, to say, oh, somebody had this one bright idea. But there's that whole process, like you say, people who invent things are very open
yeah.
to read a lot of many conversations across disciplines. I think it's that's why I think it's so interesting to study.
The discovery of penicillin is one of the examples that Samantha Copeland
Yeah,
focuses on, and tries to be able to say that um, when when Alexander Fleming discovered it, it was still a lot of other events that took place. And when you start looking at some of the events, uh, there are some kind of almost mystical parts of it, because the temperature in London at the time this happened was made it more possible, among other things, for some of the penicillin to growth to take place that could then destroy the bacteria growing in the petri dish, that Alexander Fleming was able to see look like a halo of inhibition that he had seen before from his own saliva coming onto a petri dish. So he had made these these connections, but there were other variables that came into play, like the hospital he picked was airy and old enough so that spores could float around. But then these guys were doing this research upstairs or downstairs with the penicillin mold that could come down to hit his petri dish. And there was a history of people looking for what he was looking for, but he was able to see it. But to me, the most important part of that was that he never would have been known for anything had the penicillin mold juice not gone to Oxford as a flax cleaner, and then maybe being used as something as killing some bacteria, maybe in a mouse or a guinea pig, and they picked the right one to do it with because it would have killed the other one. And then to get it, worst thing, to get it mass produced in Peoria, Illinois, relied on a woman that they called Moldy Mary, which is awful because she would, without getting all that penicillin produced, he never would have won the Nobel Prize in 1945 because it helped reduce a lot of the fatalities in Western soldiers. Moldy Mary ran across the penicillin mold in a Peoria marketplace. She worked for the group that was able to, that had the vats that could grow the stuff, and she's been ignored in history. She was a vital part of the whole thing, but Fleming and two other guys got the Nobel Prize. So I'm saying this whole thing only for our audience to know something about context and what Samantha Copeland at the Serendipity Society is trying to bring out, and what you currently are trying to say. So let's say you're among friends here.
Yep. Yes.
Let's say, talk to us about how you facilitate serendipity. And I hope you'll tell me what you think synchronicity means somewhere along the line. How serendipity, the things that you do, which include affordances, which we've defined, help increase what synchronicity experiences people have.
Mm-hmm. Well, well, thank you for that question. Yeah. Right now, and I recently published a paper about this, but the example is just, I think it's very rich. So I've been working with this nonprofit called Trasformatorio, so like Italian version of to transformation in social innovation, to look at how particular, in this particular case, ghost towns in Italy, like Sicily, can be, in line with, say, European innovation goals, can be populated once more, because people are leaving these more rural cities to go. That's a problem. And in this project that we collaborated on, or that I was just lucky enough to observe. So I'm not one of the initiators of that project, but I went along with some of the development there, was to bring together local community in a particular town with a group of designers, but also performance artists, graphic designers, a very, very varied group of experts, whether it was in blockchain technology or dance, like all sorts of people together in these transformation exercises
to try to bring these ghost towns back to life.
Yeah, but not from I would call it maybe a bit jargony, but not from a top-down perspective, like, oh, you're going to bring 20 people in, they're going to help you figure it all out, and then they leave. That that's not the idea. So it was about sustainable social innovation, which meant that you have to create something that I would call a narrative space. So a place where local community and this bunch of experts, or come together to talk about what is going on in the community. And just take and beside that, there's this what I would call a design space. So where you might want to develop something together based on what people are talking about that they need, or want, whether it's performance or an actual technology, or well, like a technological artifact, like an app or something. I don't, that's maybe a bad example, but you bring people together and you prepare this, right? It's not that you just throw people together in a room and then hope that something will happen, but you prepare this by giving, say, this group of artists, designers, an assignment of look at the local spaces, go and check out these buildings, talk to people on the street, figure out what local companies are what's happening here, and excuse me. And in this collaboration, you then create this space where people can actually share ideas and become inspired by one another.
I think this is so exciting for you to be able to describe it as some of what you're talking about, because to be able to bring a lot of people together and have them be, let me say, citizen scientists, to just use regular words, that people like, where they're out investigating what's going on in this community, trying to see what they can see, talk to people, because the people on the streets are then from the streets. They know what's going on there rather than coming from the outside. So they're able to put all these stories together. And the funny thing that happens is that you get people seeing different parts of the town coming together and saying some of the same things. And you see some of the same things coming together in a way that you can then systematize to help create a potential plan for how the project can proceed, rather than people who come from the outside and say, this is how you've got to do it, and then they leave. They're invested in it.
Yes.
And
it's about owning that idea.
Ownership. Agency is, I mean, this thing about free will is really a fun question for me. And do we have free will or not is not the right question. It's how much we have and how much we're willing to be able to assume and act on. And what you're trying to do is show people agency that maybe some of them don't know that they have.
Yes.
It's a wonderful thing to be able to help people do. So there's a old Detroit song called Dancing in the Streets. Dancing in the streets, and you are getting people to dance in the streets improvisationally, by acting and interacting with each other to come up with new possibilities.
And what was so interesting about one of the groups, one participant of City Experts was was an expert in design thinking, which is a particular way of designing, starting from, say, a problem. That is, it's a particular approach.
Something about the participants were able to come up with stuff. Would you tell us about that?
Yeah, as one of the participants, so he's a designer, said that he had been in many design processes where which on paper were, say, user-led. You invite the end user into the design process. And he said that actually this was so unique, this experience of going to this town, spending only a week there. So that's not even, it's not like you're staying there for months, but meeting so many people and being allowed to kind of let their minds wander. And as they were themselves wandering through the town, that he said, instead of thinking in terms of designing, where apparently the jargony term there is to pivot, to have an idea and then to completely change your idea, but to just go into that process with the people in the town there to come up with, in their case, they came up with an idea to create a kind of a system that would alert people to, say, landslides, because that town had been traumatized by a landslide 10 years prior, where quite a few people died because in only a few minutes, lots of rain fell, and just part of the town was wiped, was just swept away. So this town was still traumatized by that. And to actually get people to talk about that, and he said the experience of really engaging with people about what was not just on their mind, but what you could feel in the entire town. That, he said, is we recorded, or actually the organizers there in the town recorded him saying that he said, this was one of the most profound experiences of my life, to have experienced this process. And that, to me, when I saw that footage, I thought, okay, this is really what I'm very interested in. And I think this is what connects to how you speak about synchronicity. Because
How so? How so?
I feel that he experienced, and I should interview him about this, I think, experienced synchronicity with a particular community, with people in that community, and that, to be on the same level of thinking. And it, to me, it relates then, and here I'm going a little bit out of my comfort zone, I think, but to empathy also.
Yeah.
It's very much about empathy, in being able to connect to somebody on a different level, and not think about, okay, we're going to design a system and then, people will be alerted in case there's lots of rainfall. It's about feeling along with what is actually on people's minds, and talking about trauma, things that people, a trauma, you don't have the words to talk about it when you are traumatized, I think. So for in some way, creating that narrative space and design space, as abstract concepts, but just creating that space, that setting, allowed people to interact with each other in a way that gave them this idea to create this very, I guess, concrete technology. But I think what this participant was saying was not so much about, oh, I came up with a great new technology. It was about, I actually had a very profound connection to a person. And that is something that I think in the serendipity literature is not something that is discussed. And that's why I think synchronicity would be very valuable.
Synchronicity is about emotional connections. One of my most popular posts in Psychology Today is about romance. Because there's so many coincidences around romance, and people misread them sometimes to think, oh, this is meant to be. And it's only a hint that it might be something, and meant to be maybe for a minute or an hour or a couple of days or a week. Doesn't necessarily mean a lifetime, but a lot of people think this is the person I'm going to marry. But still, that's interpersonal, that's emotional, and serendipity tends to be so cognitive. So what I've done with the Coincidence Project and the Coincidence Ambassadors is gather together people who I have already interviewed, kind of like I'm interviewing you. Of the 138 interviews I've had, we got about 25 people, of which serendipitologist Sanda Erdelitz is part of, and has been part of, and trying to see what happens, because we just get them together and try to see what happens. And a lot of the people don't show up again because they're busy academics or doing other things. But we've got about a core of 6 or 8 people who come regularly. And so we want to see what properties emerge from this. Emergence is a big idea, but it's an important one now too. When you put all these people together, what's going to happen? You don't know. And you want to create the environment for it to happen without trying to direct it. So one of them says, hey, let's meet more often than once a month and in a more formal way. And somebody else says, let's call it the Coincidence Cafe. And then another one says, at the Coincidence Cafe, you can drink synchronicity or or serendipity. And they were playing with it. So now, like we're having our second or third meeting on Saturday, and there seem to be a lot of people because they invited other people, each person. We don't know what's going to happen from that, but it's like watching it happen by giving a context for it. It sounds
Yeah.
something like what you're talking about.
Yeah. And then it's interesting the way you're talking about as well, that there's no preset narrative there, right? It's emergent. So it's just see what happens. And I think that's where you, well, if you collect a lot of curious people together, I think you're going to get a very good conversation.
Yeah, it's
so
to use your term, we've created a narrative space.
yeah, yeah,
And a narrative space, again, academic words are problematic. It's a
yeah,
place to tell stories,
yeah,
place to talk about yourself or talk about ideas you've got.
yeah.
That's and then it's there are the people who are part of this saying, hey, we should keep a record of how we're doing this so it can be understood. But you are describing, I think, how we are doing this. By creating spaces for dance. And I like dance. I dance myself when I can. And I like the improvisation that comes to the music and the time and the people who are around all influence how you're feeling. But we're coming toward the end of this. And here's another, let me say, radical idea that for the serendipitologist, but probably not for you. You've talked earlier about being able to feel the audience, feel what the audience wants. You've talked before we got on the show talking about one of your maybe students who come up to you and you pick up things, let me say, intuitively from that student. Well, that intuition, that picking up stuff that you get from an audience or from a student also happens on the dance floor, where you can pick up the energy in the room. And I'm going to use the word energy because what's being neglected in modern science is not only the energy around a person's body and how that waxes and wanes, but more importantly, the energy that can happen between two people. And so I'll suggest to you, because it's happened to me with a person from Denmark who did an anthropological thing in the Netherlands with ayahuasca at an ayahuasca church in the Netherlands, which you probably never
Wow.
heard of. I
No.
mean, she's a very solid Dane, and there she was doing anthropological research with ayahuasca at an ayahuasca church in the Netherlands. I mean, there's a lot of wacky stuff going on out there, but this is on the edge research. And what she saw taking ayahuasca, which is a psychedelic usually from the Amazon, she could see energy between people. She could see energy between hearts. She could see it and how it strengthened and weakened. And I could feel energy with people. But the funny thing that I've noticed with this Dane in particular is that I can feel her energy and mine connecting over the video screen, over Zoom. So somehow the Zoom technology or this interactive thing here, through the technology, we can experience interpersonal energy without knowing how, without having to be in the same space. So what do you think about energy, interpersonal as well as around the own person themselves?
Oh, that's hard. I I think much, especially when in a teaching context. I think in a classroom setting, I use that. I tune into people's energy, I think, all the time. You know, you can. I often think of it as you have 100 students in a room, you can feel the lights go out. That's how I often describe it to others, that I think, yeah, you can feel the energy just go away, you know, and that's when you stop and you say, what's going on? You know, did you have a late night? What's going on in the class? Am I not interesting? Is it too difficult, too easy? Because you can feel the energy in the room. And I think that's it's the same as I haven't been like acting on a stage in a long time now, but I think it is similar that you have a certain sensitivity, of course, to your audience, but also to the people with whom you're on the stage, right? You have your own concentration, a shared concentration. And I think that in acting school, we had many exercises that were about creating synchronicity, about like walk in a circle blindfolded and then try to start running at the same time without seeing one another. It's about feel the other's presence.
Yeah.
And I think that is very, that when I teach, I use that a lot. And I think in the situation that we're in now, where I teach online a lot, it still works. You can feel people not being present. It's not just about sharing a screen there or people chatting, or you can just feel it when people are not listening. And but it takes a different focus of the person who's speaking. I think
it takes the willingness to believe that you have this way of picking up information from your environment. You have to believe that first, have some support for it, which you got through your acting training and probably before, because you've been like this before. So it's like just augmented something that you already have. You have to believe it. And I believed it for a long time. And I'm just glad that I'm seeing other people confirm that we can do energy and that you can do it online is what we like to call far out and groovy.
But this probably also connects to studies into energy, like what is it, like spiritual studies into Reiki and stuff like that, right? Over distance or
that's
healing over distance.
That one, I the difference between doing it while you're in person-y kind of thing and doing it over distance is a real conundrum for me, because I don't. It's a question that I love and I don't have a good answer for. I had an experience of feeling the pain of my father while he was dying. He was choking. I was choking 3,000 miles away at the same time. And there are other experiences like that. How does that happen?
Well, that just, I have that the same with my father, that when we often call one another when we're thinking about each other, so that he's already walking to the phone
when you
because and then I call. Or that when I have a migraine, he has a migraine. That I call him and I say, "Oh, do you have?" "Yeah, me too." So maybe that's air pressure. I don't know, but
no. That's the old definition of telepathy: to feel the pain of a loved one at a distance. So you're having that experience. That's within the synchronicity, not so much within the serendipity thing. So I'm glad to welcome you into the synchronicity direction.
Yeah, it's great. I'm really excited to have met you, but then also I think this opens up a whole new area for me to explore from this improvisation perspective, which is very much about acting, about doing something. And I think, wait, the synchronicity then perhaps for me then goes to that energy level.
I'd like to see where else it goes, but we have to wrap up this wonderful conversation. And I'm glad to stimulate your synchronicity node in your brain, in your mind, and see where it goes. So it's been delightful talking with you, Sabrina. Thank you very much for talking with me.
Thank you also for this conversation. Really great. Yeah.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.